Welcome, everybody. This is Patrick Durkin from the Wellness Enterprise, broadcasting today from West Texas, where I have moved, and I've got some new friends here. It's pretty exciting. You know, I've known Chad Wall at Natural Ecosystem Restoration for quite a while, and Chad and I have been working on structured water and getting it out there to farmers and telling the story. But there's only so far you can go until you get some seasons of growth and you get proof. And that's where we have a new special guest today, Jeff Miller, Forefront Agronomy. Jeff, big part of his business is helping people measure the moisture in their soil. So it's not theoretical anymore. Now we have real data. And these gentlemen have told me that they've had some great results with their second growing season with structured water. And so we're getting together today to convene about that information and to put it out there so you all can learn from the experiences of what structured water is doing and how we're measuring it and how you can count on it making a difference for you. So Chadwell, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's been going on and get us going?
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Excited to be here today. And, you know, I just want to give a little bit of foundation on why I'm doing what I'm doing. I began no-till farming about 20 years ago, really focusing on how to prevent erosion, which out here in our part of the world, that's mostly soil erosion from the wind, not soil erosion from moisture, but it's still pretty easy to see when we do get excessive rainfalls, how we're losing soil in erosion with that water runoff as well. And so I started there, and through the course of that, I kind of stumbled into soil health, understanding that things weren't really working the way that I had been led to believe they were through college and through my family's farming practices. And so I began a deep dive into, well, what's really functioning in the soil and what do we do to help that improve? And that led to the consulting work that I do now, focusing on how we utilize plant nutrition and water applications, particularly with energized water, to actually influence that soil structure and soil system the most effectively that we can, so that we're helping that entire ecosystem to actually function the way that it was created and intended to function. And so that led me to trying to figure out what structured water was and how structured water actually works and what makes it that way and why is it not that way, and what all of the circumstances are that contribute to whether that water is actually energized and doing what it needs to for the soil system and the plants versus the way that we have historically applied it, and what are the implications of that. So I started doing my own experiments, did a lot of work with animals and humans where, you know, you could measure the results more easily with the way people felt with their hydration and things like that. But we struggled with how to set up scientific analysis on field scale where we could actually measure something that we knew was being influenced by that water application rather than all of the other variables that so easily contribute to the quality or the quantity of a commodity or a crop in each individual season. So a couple of years ago, I came across Jeff Miller at Forefront, which is why we were excited to start working with him, because the data that he had in regard to different types of applications and how that's affecting soil moisture content as well as the efficiency of the applications, I knew was really important to the work that we were doing. And what I had come to understand through the work that I had been doing is that if we can't measure how much we've been putting on, we have no idea whether we've improved it or not. And that seems so simple. But as a rule, you know, my farming operation had always been under the impression of we put on all we can put on because that's our greatest limiting factor. So if it's not raining, we're watering. And what Jeff has been working on for a number of years is actually validating that that's not necessarily the case. And then you can do a lot of things with the way you manage your soil to improve that condition so that you're not wasting that precious resource and you're not over applying when you don't need to be applying at all. And so having that baseline data in some of these fields to know what has historically been done and then be able to compare that to what we're seeing after we energize that water was pretty impressive to me. And I knew that was a segment of the industry that we really needed to understand what has been being done and how we improve upon that. So that's kind of the foundation for what brought us to here. And I'm excited for Jeff to share with us today what he has witnessed now, plugging that into the data that he already had, and then seeing how those efficiencies can be improved.
Great, Jeff, you've got some slides to share with us. I think Chad's going to talk about the first one, right? So if you could go ahead and screen share now, and Chad, you can just say a word about where we're starting here. That'd be great.
Okay, so the first question that comes up is actually, what is structured water? We understand that all water is not H2O. Gerald Pollack has done a lot of work in regard to this with his lab analysis to actually understand that there's a fourth phase of water, which is what we refer to as structured water. It's called a number of different things depending on who's referring to it, but structured water is most common. And that's actually H3O2, which is the way that that water molecule exists in its natural form without it being bound unnaturally to other things that are in that solution. So the vitality and the energetics of that water has a negative charge. And then when we compress it and pump it and apply friction energy to it is when we create the unnatural things that happen, which is what separates our irrigation water from the actual rainwater that everyone has witnessed has a tremendous impact on crop growth and production, as opposed to a significant amount of irrigation water in that same scenario doesn't produce the same results. And so that's what we've been trying to understand and validate and identify all of the intricacies of that so that we can maximize our efforts with the water that we are applying.
So Jeff, you've been working with this water in the fields for 2 years now. So tell us about it. What are you seeing, my friend?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny how Chad and I came across each other. We both had a shared client that he was doing his things with, and I was doing my things with from a moisture sensing standpoint, and got to the end of the season and had noticed that something had changed in this field. And with regards to how much better it was from the prior years, how much better that crop had handled salt stress, heat stress, and getting water into the ground from an infiltration standpoint as we were monitoring his irrigation. And the grower didn't tell me that he had done something different. We just saw it in the data. And so after the season, we got hooked up with Chad and started kind of sharing ideas back and forth with what was going on. And that's when I became aware of structured water and the possible benefits that we were seeing, and hopefully that we would see in years to come out here in West Texas as far as an agricultural production standpoint. And so that led us onto a journey to start exploring some of these things a little further and expanding this observation territory. And with our soil moisture monitoring program that we run with a number of growers out here in West Texas, I had a significant amount of historical data with using soil moisture sensors and observations to get us a baseline set, and then install these AQUA ENERGIZER devices on and monitor what was going on and comparing the differences between the two. And so that's kind of where we're at the end of year 2, start of year 3, starting to look at these systems on a number of pivots across West Texas. And so that's what we're here to talk about, some of those results. What we've got here showing is a field that we've been working with for 5 years out east of Lubbock, there in Crosby County. And this producer's, I wouldn't say he's a high input producer. He watches his dollars and cents really well. Doesn't have a large well volume, but somewhere we're shooting for 2 bale cotton crop every year. And he's been implementing technology over the years, from variable rate, moisture sensors, even squeezing his pivot down, or his nozzle spacing down to 40 inches. And this year we applied the structured water devices on his pivot to monitor, because we had that historical data. And one of the things that we noticed once we put these on that pivot was just, it seemed, I can't really put a hard thing to it. I don't know how to explain it, but that the water, once we put them on there, started moving differently. And so we've got some pictures here, and these are all from the same field, just to kind of give you an idea. Here on the left is a nozzle with the device on it. The picture in the middle is on the same pivot without, but we still see similar water movement. Of course, this one was in a row where we had some cover crop residue left, and but just really liked how that water was moving, how it was going into the ground rather quickly. If you look back behind where that nozzle is, we're not sitting here with water on the surface for very long. And this Pullman clay loam soil can seal off amazingly very quickly after a rainfall event. And I've seen water stand in those hard middles for a quarter of a mile, it seems like. And so that is one thing that we noticed as we compared this to other pivots, is that water was soaking into the ground a little bit quicker. And then the picture on the right is just a kind of a snapshot of across the field. This was, well, it ended up making around 900 pounds for the year, right there close to his goal. Like I said, he's not going to go put a whole lot of inputs into it, but we really wanted to see where we had good water quality, just not enough of it, and how these devices would work. And we'll dig into the data here in just a sec. You guys have any comments or questions about this?
Well, one thing I would like to point out there, Jeff, just so that everyone who's watching this and is not familiar with the technology understands that we're not putting a device on every nozzle. However, all of the water from all of the nozzles is still being affected. And so that's important to know, that this is not a filtration technology where we're trying to take something out of the water. We're actually changing the energetic resonance of the water, and it affects all of the nozzles, not just the ones that the devices are on.
So how big was this? How big was this pivot, and how many devices were on it?
This is a 70-acre pivot, so a 6-tower, and we actually put 4 devices on this one, just like we would on a quarter miler. I think we probably could have got by with 3.
Yeah, so on a quarter mile system, or 1,320 feet, we're essentially roughly splitting that into fourths and putting 4 devices fairly evenly spaced on that quarter mile system. And so you did the same thing here, even though it was a little bit shorter.
And so is your experience that even though you only have 4 of these devices over the quarter mile, you're still getting a pretty even reaction to the energy of that water? Like you're seeing it evenly versus, just where the devices are?
From what I can tell, yes, we saw a very even, uniform application across the pivot. Of course, it's hard to get a non-treated and a treated in the same circle with the way that water structures itself. So, I would have to go compare this to another pivot that was nearby. But, to me, it felt like it flowed out, it soaked in, and we were getting that same application across the entire pivot.
Well, I wanted to go ahead, Chad.
I was just going to say, I have witnessed, I know we're talking about a row crop here that's a little more challenging to see it, but where we have been doing this work in forage crops as well as in small grain crops, where you actually have a solid stand of crop, you would anticipate, if there was any difference between those nozzles, that you would either see an overwatering or an underwatering or something different about that, like you would when you have a nozzle that's over applying, or a nozzle that's under applying. It's very easy to see across the broadcast crop. And we're not seeing any of that streaking, no matter what the row pattern is, and no matter how the pivots are crossing those those drilled rows or those even broadcast forage crops. And we're not seeing any difference between nozzles like you would expect if everything wasn't being treated the same.
I'll dig into some of the data that we have been collecting over the last couple of years and in the comparisons that we made. And so here is a corn pivot that we did up around Spearman, Texas. This is another tight soiled type area, but this particular pivot has had some salinity issues that's within the water where they're pumping from. And so we selected that pivot for that reason. They've also got a lot of water compared to what we have down here around on the South Plains, and so wanted to see what this would look like in a higher volume standpoint. And so in 2019, which is the sensor graph that I'm showing at the top of the screen, we did not have these devices on, but we've been monitoring these fields for a number of years, and so just kind of looking through there, we followed a fairly rigorous schedule. And as far as our moisture monitoring program goes, we pay a lot of attention on where those roots are at and where our irrigation is getting in respect to those roots. Are we getting them down to it? Are we pushing water below them? Are we not taking care of that upper profile? And so the first arrow that I have here on the left is just kind of showing that early season, starting to really watch that root growth start digging down deeper into the profile. But one thing that we noticed is once we kind of got to the mid season, we're sitting, our roots only got about 22 inches deep. And you can see that as we see spikes here in the lower sensors on the profile, we're moving water down there, but we just don't have the rooting activity as we move through the season. As opposed to 2020, where we put these AQUA ENERGIZER devices on, the first thing that I noticed is about that same time, into the growing season, we're seeing a better root penetration, deeper into the profile. We're actually matching up our irrigation needs and putting the water on that's getting down to those depths. And then as we get into some of these critical time periods around tassel, what we noticed is that we were pushing roots all the way down to 30 inches. And so having that extra, those extra 10 inches roughly of moisture available to that plant would have led to a nice yield increase until we got a hailstorm shortly after this. And that's why you don't see much rooting activity, and it's because we just didn't have the leaves and things to support stuff. But really overall, very impressed within this scenario where we were seeing an improvement with how our roots were getting further deeper into the soil, as well as that water movement going along with it. And I would say, it's hard to compare because we got such a bad hailstorm, but leading up to that critical time period there around tassel, we were tracking along, maybe a slight improvement in water usage. So hopefully we'll have another year here in 21 to be able to evaluate this and take it all the way through the season without bad weather events. I'm going to move to the next one. This is from the pictures that we just showed a couple of slides ago, but this is cotton here in Crosby County. And what we've got is two pivots, and they're basically sister pivots. They're both 70 acres, and we share water between the two of them. And we've worked on these pivots from a moisture monitoring standpoint for the last 3 years. And so we've got some nice data to look at. And so looking at the east pivot, which would be the top one, which we did not have an AQUA ENERGIZER, you see that we applied 10.25 inches throughout the growing season, but we don't see the spikes like we do on the one below. And what that's showing is that we're not getting that water into the ground like we need to. as opposed to the pivot, which was on the west, right next to this, just west of it, is where we had the AQUA ENERGIZERS, same ones as the pictures. You can see that as we spike up, we're adding water, and then you can see as those start stair stepping down, that is a good indicator of where those roots are at, what they're actually using. And so we used a different sensor on this field, so we only had an 8-inch and an 18-inch reading, but overall very impressed with how well we were able to get that water into the ground and how quick. It wasn't sitting on the surface prone to evaporation. It was actually, once it was on there, it was soaking into the ground much quicker. And we can do some time analysis to see what that was, but I'm just looking at it, it's within an hour, just looking at the data right here. So number one, getting it into the ground quicker, being able to push it deeper into the profile. As you notice on the top graph, the orange line, we just never see any real spikes. We weren't getting that water down to that 18-inch span. And so looking at this, number one, we saved about 2 inches of water. And number two, we made about 150 pounds more cotton on less water than we did with the AQUA ENERGIZERS than we didn't. So really feel like there's some promise to how this thing is putting that water into the ground. And I've always told folks, water on the surface evaporates, water in the ground transpirates. And so that's kind of our focus with how we manage water.
Now, I think if I remember correctly on these two fields, Jeff, there was also a nozzle spacing difference. Is that correct?
Yes, there is. So the top field is still on 80-inch spacings. The bottom field is on 40-inch spacings. And, so we're comparing several different variables here. But as we go back and look at years prior, where we went from 80s to 40s, we've had an issue, and we've had to adjust our irrigation scheduling on the 40s because we weren't getting that water into the ground. It was staying on the surface too long, and it wasn't soaking in deep enough. And so I want to say that my next slide, we actually look at that.
Okay, sorry.
So here is that west field that we were looking at, comparing 2020 on the bottom to 2019. So here we have the 40-inch drops in both years. And 2019 was the first year that we had that. And really, we struggled getting water into the ground, and we were putting it on in less amounts more frequently, I guess is the way to put that. Looking at 2020 and making the adjustments, putting the AQUA ENERGIZER in there, we actually had less irrigations, and I didn't put that up there, but we had over 9.5 inches on that cotton in 2019. In 2020, we used 8 in a little bit over 8 inches. Hard to compare year to year for obvious reasons because we have so much different scenarios, but still we had less irrigation events. We were able to push that water into the profile better and utilize it instead of what I see in 2019. We did get some water down into that 18-inch profile, but we weren't utilizing it with our roots as effectively because we see an increase in moisture. Whereas on the bottom in the orange line, we stay fairly static. What we put in, we pulled out, and we made 900-pound cotton for this year. So not great, but not bad either. Finally, we'll move into kind of what brought Chad and I together is working with a producer down in Dawson County. This is super sandy ground, decent amount of water, but there's a salinity problem in not only the soil, but also the water. And this producer had struggled for a number of years in that scenario, especially whenever we got into a hot, dry summer. And so what I'm showing here is 2018. We did not have any AQUA ENERGIZERS on this field. And just showing, we irrigate between 1 inch and 1.25 inches on every pass. And if you look at this, what we see is we see a really high spike, and then it comes right back down. and there's very little amount of that water that's actually getting into the profile. And that's what the graph below shows with the blue bars and the red bars. You do see that we had a rainfall event there around the 1st of July where we did get a significant amount of rainwater, and we used that fairly quickly. But we just never could build a profile. We could never, get, we were showing that we were getting a half of an inch into the profile at any given time, and it's just really frustrating. So come to 2019, I go out and I manage this crop like we normally have, but we start noticing some differences. The first thing is that whenever we applied irrigation, we were putting out closer to what we said we were. So early in the season, we generally don't run big amounts because that crop doesn't need it. But we're looking at those 7, 8, 10 passes. As we get into those critical time periods, we're getting up closer to that inch and a quarter, and then we tail that off at closer to the end of the season. And what I noticed as we were moving through the season is that we could go longer in between irrigations before we needed to trigger one. The other thing is just noticing how much water was getting into the soil, staying there, being available to the plant. And in a sandy environment, south of Lubbock, that's a big feat that we've got to overcome. And so, really, just looking back at the vast improvement. And once again, I didn't even know that these things were on the pivot until we got to the end of the year and started looking at the data and having those conversations. Moving to 2020, this is the same farm, just not the same field. We moved our moisture device over to the field to the west, but we really saw a lot of the same trends because we had AQUA ENERGIZERS on that pivot. We were getting more water into the soil, and we were able to extend out those irrigations, and so our intervals weren't quite as much. And the cotton over here made pretty decent for the year that we had. But just to kind of show you, here's another scenario in really the same area, just another pivot that we're seeing some of the same results with getting that water into the ground that we say that we put on. And so approaching those 95, 96% irrigation efficiencies. Just digging in through some of the data, this is 2018 back to not having an AQUA ENERGIZER on the pivot. And you can see that we've got a number of spikes, and that's an irrigation event every time. But what we see is we see a spike and then we see it fall back down, and we're not ever really adding any true moisture into the profile. We do get some rooting activity, here around the 12th of August. It heated up then, but we just didn't have a very good rooting activity in the upper part of the profile where most of that water uptake is happening. As we move to 2019, we get a little better stair stepping. We get a little better movement of water where it doesn't just spike and come right back down. And we actually show that our profile is building up. And it's still not where I want it to be, but it is a vast improvement from where we were. And I feel like this is something that we're going to continually see improvements of over the course of time. And then here's 2020. Where we saw better, this would be 2 years into AQUA ENERGIZERS on this pivot. And what we are seeing is a much better moisture profile, a much better, we're starting to see some stair stepping action deeper into the profile, and just really was able to manage that water so much easier by putting on an inch to an inch and a quarter, and then waiting 8 or 9 days before we come back and put the next one on. And but we were we're not pushing nutrients below the root zone and those kind of scenarios. The last thing that we really noticed was just some general observations on salinity, and being that these farms have a fair amount of salt coming through the water, we noticed whenever I started kind of digging into the data, and kind of take this with a grain of salt, but just comparing 2018 down here on the bottom to 2019, we picked the same time frames to compare, and I need to probably dig into this a little bit deeper, but around July 1st, whenever we're full on bore pumping, and then coming in here in the 1st of September, whenever we'd kind of be nearing the end of the season. And what I've noticed is, as I've got some numbers here, that going from 2018 to 2019, we saw a smaller salinity load in that ground to start with, and we didn't see as big a buildup, especially in the top 12 to 18 inches. And so thinking that there may be something along the lines of helping these pivots that we've got salty water to be able to break some of that apart and get that water into the ground better and not have the detrimental effects of having sodiums in there. And I think there was some article that came out recently that verifies this stuff on your website from California, if I'm not mistaken, Patrick. So some exciting things that we're going to keep tabs on, and I'm really excited about where we're headed with this, that we don't have to have a lot of crazy expensive products and doing some crazy things. Sometimes it's something as simple as just getting our water fixed, and then everything else that comes behind it works better because of it.
Perfect. So one thing I want to point out, Jeff, because it really struck me after, before you and I got together, the producer was the first one who noticed what was taking place, because he realized via his pumping costs that his irrigation interval had extended out, because he was not spending near as much money as he previously had on the same field, and we were not getting any rain events to help with that. And so he was questioning whether or not the crop still looked good. You and I were both looking at it from different angles and affirming that, yeah, the crop's not suffering, it looks good. But he was concerned that he wasn't applying the water that he historically had, and he was concerned that that was going to come back to bite him, if you will, because he was getting behind. And then when you actually collected the data and graphed it at the end of the year, when you presented that to me, what really struck me was you said, let me show you something, Chad, that I have never seen happen before. And in fact, I didn't even think it was possible that through these irrigation intervals that are extended from what they previously had been, we were not only meeting crop demand, we were actually gaining profile moisture over the crop demand through that peak period, which, I don't know how many years you've been collecting data, 4 or 5 years in different locations at least, but to see something that you didn't even think was possible for doing something as simple as fixing the water, I thought was pretty significant.
Yeah, that was pretty pretty telling right there, especially in those kind of sands down south of Lubbock, that we don't normally see a building of moisture profile during the growing season. And I feel like there's something with the water, but there's probably after digging into some other things, I think that you're also being kind to your soil microbes, and then as they are healthy and excited and doing the things that they're doing, they're actually adding moisture into the profile as well through their respiration process. So you kind of get a two-pronged approach there. And of course, this producer's been working on his soil health for a number of years, cover crops and doing things like that. So I think it just kind of kicked that system off, just kind of gave it a kick in the pants to move on to the next level.
Sure. Yeah, I would contend that's, again, 2 years data now. So we're not deep into it. But again, if we can measure what we've been doing so that we have a baseline and then know how we compare to what that baseline is, and we can see that we're extending our intervals, we're not only conserving that precious resource, but we're saving money, which is going to make us more profitable by not wasting the money that we don't actually need. And I think a lot of that is, as you said, we're changing the energetic structure of that water, even with these waters that are being applied that are high in salts. we're getting it into the soil differently, which is helping, but then we're maintaining that in the soil different so that the plant still has access to it. It's not just going right out of the profile, either via evaporation from setting on top or from not being able to hold on to it. Either one, the crops are improving. I know this producer in particular said in his historical conditions like we had in 2019, he would have not harvested anything because his water would have become so toxic without additional rainfall, he would have had to stop irrigating. But yet we were able to irrigate all the way through, make the best crop the farm's ever had in a year that was not a good year for making good crops, but it was a significant improvement just by how the water was working in that soil.
Chad, I wonder if you might go just a little bit further to let people know how simple the economics of this are, right? Like getting a crop like you just mentioned in 2019 versus not getting one. Obviously, that's a big difference. But how little does it cost to put these AQUA ENERGIZERS in, and what kind of return on investment? How long does it take?
Okay, so what we're doing right now is actually costing about $1,400 retail for that quarter-mile system. The installation is very simple because, again, we're only using 4 devices that actually screw on between the pressure regulator and the nozzle if you have pressure regulators. So it's, if you have access to driving the length of the pivot, it's a 5 or 10 minute process to get them installed. And then they have 5-year warranties on them. And so that roughly $12 an acre is spread out over at least 5 years based on the warranty of the product. We don't see any reason for it to ever fail unless you hit it with something, or a tip was or nozzle was stopped up and you froze it and broke it. Otherwise, there's no reason for them to ever fail. So this is what leads me to my conclusion that I've been stating for a couple of years, which it does not matter what we're using water for. If we are pumping water or using water, we can't afford not to structure it, because we're gaining more and more data that is validating the truth in that. But the cost of it is so minimal. I mean, we literally can waste $2 or $3 an acre on something that we're not even aware of, compared to what we know these AQUA ENERGIZERS are producing over that 5-year period of time. So the return on the investment, when you consider, if we split the 12 over 4 years, you're looking at $3 an acre. You don't have to have much return on that investment to say that is an excellent investment, which is why I say we can't afford not to do it, because it's too simple. And again, what I have seen after several years of doing this now is that where guys can't measure the difference, they don't know how much it's doing for them. If they don't know how much they've been applying, I have no doubt they're making their water much more effective and much more efficient, which means that's going to translate to something better. But now with Jeff's data that we're actually seeing, we're gaining profile moisture. Well, then, I think a lot of the guys that are not actually seeing a difference in their crop because they haven't been able to measure how much they were applying compared to what they're applying now with similar circumstances, they're over applying water. And if you don't have a way to gauge that, then you're just putting more of that valuable resource into the crop that it's not able to utilize it, which is that, to me, that's the significance of the work that Jeff has been doing. Is when we get down to the bare bones economics, we can't afford to be doing something that's not returning something to us. So if we know what that resource is getting us, then we can evaluate how much it's actually returning to us.
Well, that's what I love about what you guys bring together: increased efficiency and measurement. It's perfect. Do you guys have any closing words besides, please, both of you share where people can find you? Jeff?
I don't have anything else. I'm fascinated with what we're seeing, and I'm elated to see how much difference we can make, because again, not only the economics of pumping the water, but the value to the whole ecosystem of conserving that water and not wasting something that's not actually returning, a good value to us for what it's taking. And my company is Natural Ecosystem Restoration. I can be reached here. You can see the numbers that have been put up there. My website is naturalecorestoration.com, and we have 2 years worth of data and a lot of other information about what we do there.
Okay, I can be reached at the number here on the screen or forefrontagronomy@gmail.com. I'm also very active on Facebook and Twitter, and share information throughout the growing season as we're trying new things and following up on stuff that we're doing. And we've also started a YouTube channel, which posting a lot of these type of videos for your resource to go back to.
That's great. Well, thanks for getting the word out, guys. Really appreciate your work.
Thanks.